on To the Contrary. Academy Award winner Patricia Arquette and the revitalized movement for pay equity. Tell me about your struggle.
Well, when you're a single mom and you only have a little bit of money, you really are balancing, can we buy food or diapers?
Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. This week's Equal Pay Day is commemorated with new reports and celebrity support.
All right. Hey, who's unhappy on Unhappy Pay Day?
It's been more than 50 years since the Equal Pay Act took effect. Yet, American women continue to earn less than men. This week marked Equal Pay Day. It's the symbolic day women must work in addition to last year to earn what a man earned last year alone, since women earn on average 79 cents for every dollar earned by men. The House Senate Joint Economic Committee released a report that breaks down pay disparities by age, race, and state. By state, Louisiana is the worst place for women's wages, New York the best. By race, African American women and Latinas earn even less than white women, 60 cents and 55 cents respectively. By age, the gap becomes a canyon as time goes on, putting twice as many women in poverty during retirement as men. Patricia Arquette is continuing her campaign for equal pay, the campaign she started when she accepted the 2015 Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, that for her role in the movie Boyhood.
There was a lot of things in my mind before I made that speech. I told my boyfriend and my friend, I'm probably going to lose a bunch of work, but I'm going to say something tonight. I don't care. The next day a woman came up to me and she was crying and she said, my boss called me in today and gave me a raise.
Arquette was in Washington, D.C. this week meeting with lawmakers on Capitol Hill, holding news conferences, and even helping to host a block party with the American Association of University Women. Arquette teamed up with New York Democrat Carolyn Maloney, who's been fighting for pay equity and to revitalize the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution for years. Patricia Arquette, such a great opportunity to be here and to be able to interview you. Congresswoman Maloney, regular guest on our show. Great to see you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you. What drove you to this issue?
I won the Academy Award for this character of this single mom who was struggling to pay her bills. And I really thought, how would her life have been different if she'd been paid the full dollar she earned?
Do you know for a fact that you've been on movies where the male lead made twice as much as you did?
Oh yeah, but really when I was talking about that in that speech, I wasn't even thinking about Hollywood. I knew across the board this was happening to women. I was seeing women struggle in poverty, try to be parents, try to feed their kids, not get an opportunity to become the manager. But oftentimes they were behaving as the manager and they still weren't getting the title or the money. So as I learned more and more about this issue, and I learned how little women were making, especially women of color, I really wanted to do something about it.
This really seems to have picked up speed now. It's been, Congresswoman Maloney's been fighting for this since she's been in the House. Why now? Why is it picking up speed? Is it you? Are you working with Meryl Streep on it? She's been fighting it for years.
I think women are 51% of the population, the largest voting bloc. We are now, a lot of us, primary breadwinners for our families or participating in the family income. We've got a lot of single family homes where moms have kids. So the whole responsibility has shifted, I think. And women can't take it anymore, frankly. And I personally think it's negligence.
Tell me about your struggle when you were a single mom trying to feed your child. What was that like for you?
Well, when you're a single mom and you only have a little bit of money, you really are balancing, can we buy food or diapers? How do I pay for a doctor even though it's a well care visit? And my rent at the same time. I don't know how I'm going to do this.
What were you doing? Were you waiting tables?
Well, I was getting jobs, waiting tables, trying to get acting jobs at the same time. And frankly, at a certain point, it was like, I'll do any job I need to do because I have a baby to feed and whatever time, whatever that ends up being. And I was very lucky that I got an acting job. But I was going into stores asking everybody, you know, please, I need a job. I got a kid to feed, you know, I have a little baby.
Congresswoman, let me ask you the same question. You have been pounding the pavements, not to use a cliche, but it is a cliche, for so many years on pay equity, and now it seems like it's really taking off. Tell me about how that makes you feel.
She has brought new energy, new focus, and new devotion that has given me more strength, and certainly more strength to the movement. I would say that in her speech at the Oscars, she elevated the Equal Rights Amendment, putting women in the Constitution, giving women the respect that they deserve. She elevated this to a national debate, to a national discussion on why this is important. And I was watching it at home, and I was in bed, and I literally jumped out of bed up and down because so many people talk about it. But they don't really do anything about it. And when you poll it, it polls at like 90 plus. Everybody's for it. Of course I'm for equal opportunity. Of course I think women should be respected. Of course I think they should be in the Constitution. But few are able to take that and turn it into real action. She had a few seconds to talk nationally to America when everyone was watching it. Everyone watches the Oscars, and she used it not for herself, not for her movie, but to promote other women.
We're still in a Republican-controlled Congress. Do you see anything, do you hope for any bill to come forward?
I couldn't even go to work if I didn't believe I could be successful, and I will tell you, I had a list of roughly 10 bills and things that I wanted to accomplish. I've accomplished all of them. Save women in the Constitution. And we have been working today and yesterday and tomorrow, and we have been meeting with Republicans, with Republican leaders, with Republican members, and most of the Democrats are already on the bill. We have roughly 189 co-sponsors. We will need 290 to pass it. I believe it is doable because everyone believes in equality of opportunity. Also, it does not cost any taxpayer money. Not 1 cent does it cost the taxpayers. So here's a way you can help half the population. You can give them the rights of equality that they so rightly deserve and the respect that they deserve. So I'm hoping that my colleagues in Congress will join Patricia in pushing this forward.
Are you talking about pay equity or the ERA?
I'm talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. I support pay equity, but I certainly feel the real goal is to put women in the Constitution. Right now, Bonnie, it depends on who's in charge of the legislature, who's in charge of the Supreme Court. Our rights should not be at the whim of what legislative body or who is. It should be a bedrock principle that is there. And what's so unusual, we as a country will fight so hard to put in the Constitution of Japan women's equality, into the Constitution of Afghanistan and Iraq and all these countries, but it's not in the Constitution of the great country of America, which has done so much for women.
And you have been meeting with Republican members. How do they receive you?
I've really met a lot of wonderful people, and I'm excited to see what comes of it. I mean, we started some initial conversations, and I think they're fathers, they're mothers to daughters. They understand the circumstance and the situation. Let's see what happens, but I'm hoping that we can make this nonpartisan and come together and really stand up to the world and say we truly do believe in equality. And after 272 years, we're putting women in the United States Constitution, just like all these other countries have women in their Constitution. And let us be the first nation on earth to have true gender pay equality for all women in the United States.
In 1963, I believe it was, Congress passed pay equity for women, and yet we're still, as you say, 79 cents on the dollar. Why is that?
In 1963, we were 59 cents to the dollar. We got a raise. We're 79 cents to the dollar. We have been stuck there for 30 years.
And there's been a lot of loopholes in all of these laws, which is part of why we need the ERA. Because at a certain point, look, we are at the whim of the legislatures at the time, at the laws at the time. They're reinterpreted in strange and bizarre ways. Who knew that they were going to interpret that Lilly Ledbetter's act of discrimination, of not being paid fairly, her whole career, would go back to that she would have had to have filed it 18 months after the first offense? Where does that's insanity.
And we had to correct that legislatively, and we did.
Do you expect to see us, now that this movement is taking off, do you expect to see women making 100% on the dollar anytime soon in our lifetime?
Listen, it can happen as fast as we want. It can happen very quickly. Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, some of the women in his company came to him and said, we want to make sure we're getting paid fairly. And he's a man, an integral man. So he said, well, I agree. I'm sure you guys are being paid fairly. Let's do a gender audit. And he found he was underpaying women by $3 million a year. Now that's one company. That's a lot of money. That's $120 million those workers would have been missing out on in their lifetime. So just add that company by company. That is exactly what's happening in 98% of all businesses. Women are being driven into poverty. Their children don't have enough literal food to eat, and we need to readdress this.
Do you expect to see pay equity in your lifetime?
If we put women in the Constitution and give them the respect that they deserve, yes. What this report
explain to me how that will work. So there's an Equal Rights Amendment which just adds the words that, women, men and women in the Constitution, and then what? Women sue?
Right now, when women sue, they have to prove the intent to discriminate. Not just that they discriminated. Not just, hey, I'm a manager, this guy's a manager, I got paid less than he did. And we had the same college education and everything. I would have to also prove this company intentionally discriminated against me. Even though they've paid all these women less than men, I still have to say, I have to find an email, a text somewhere that said, pay women less than men. I mean, it's absurd. So women have they have to prove their case twice in a weird way. So if we had a constitutional amendment, they would have a higher scrutiny of law.
Strict scrutiny.
A strict scrutiny of law for suspect classes, which covers race and other groups that have notoriously been discriminated against. And we have data for, you're talking about 1963, we've had data for decades to tell us this is a group that's been discriminated against.
Even conservative women say that that women make choices, like they take out time out of the workplace for their children. What do you say to those? And so really, they make choices that cause their careers to fall behind those of men, and so that's why
I tell them to look up Mark Benioff at Salesforce. Those women were not at home taking care of children. That's not why they were getting paid less. It was subconscious discrimination. And yes, women do take time off. And is that such a terrible thing? For us to take care of our children in the United States of America? But part of why women are penalized is when they are doing that beautiful thing of taking care of our dying and our loved ones, they get a big zero on their Social Security every year. And then that gets averaged in, and when they get older, it drives down their monthly income.
40% of the income in American families, it comes from a woman's income. So when you discriminate against a woman, you're discriminating against her family and her children and her husband. And it also showed that there was a 40% unexplained differential after you factored in the reasons such as taking time off for the birth of a child. And economists won't say what it is, but it's 40% unexplained. What do you think it is? It's a bias against women, or just knowing they can get away with it, or whatever it is. It's unfair.
Yes, it's closer when women are younger, but still, even at 89%, You could never go to someone and say, just because the sex you are, I'm going to take out 11% of your income. Is that cool? I mean, no, it's not cool. It compounds over time. We know we save money when we're young. It grows and it grows. And when you get older, that money's a lot more. Well, women are losing 11% of their income, the youngest women, right off the bat.
Last question. How are you going to carry this campaign forward? You're going to go back to Hollywood. You'll do your cable show, and you're doing movies.
Well, Carolyn is the champ. I mean, let's all let our legislatures know, our lawmakers, to partner with her to support equal rights.
But are you going to try to stir up support?
We're stirring up all kinds of trouble. Look, and we just started a petition at change.org/ERA. We have 100,000 signatures now. Let's get a couple million signatures and drop it on everyone's. We can all participate in this, but the reality is if we don't, we are basically saying it's okay to discriminate against women. They deserve to be paid less. They are of less value in our nation. And we're saying to the world, we don't treat our women very well here.
So what do you see, Laura Brown, as the best way to close the pay gap?
I would love to see transparency in organizations' pay scales, who they're paying what amount of money.
I want to see us remove some of those government-imposed barriers that make it expensive to hire women and then takes more from their paychecks.
I would love, like I said, to see them pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would actually close a lot of those loopholes that were left from Equal Pay Act of 1963.
I'm with you. I'd like to see some transparency because for women to be able to get paid as much as their male counterpart, you have to know how much your male counterpart is making.
Right. And there also, by the way, a lot of corporate policy is you are not to discuss your pay your pay level with your colleagues, and if you do, it's a fireable offense. Why isn't Congress addressing that issue?
I mean, the problem is I couldn't agree more. You know, the more you know, I think the better armed you are to negotiate for your own worth. And also, I'm a huge believer that peer pressure is extraordinarily powerful. So if everyone in an organization understands really how the pay is being doled out, I think you'll see a much more meritocratic environment overall.
Is there any way to make it, for all nonprofits, by the way, you can go online and get tax returns and you know what people make, but for-profit companies, there's no such thing. Is there any way to make them disclose? Can Congress pass a law saying a private corporation has to, or a public corporation, but a for-profit corporation has to list the salaries of everyone who works for it?
Well, I know Patrice doesn't want me to advocate on behalf of another regulation that would force businesses to do anything else here, but it would be nice to have the information. So, for instance, Glassdoor is a place that you can go and put in your personal salary information, and then when someone else is looking to go to that organization, they can look and see how much of the person before me making this, and you can do it anonymously. You don't have to do it where your name is on that position. So I think there are some things that women could do individually to put that out there and encourage other people to do the same thing without forcing a business to specifically do that, or the government to get involved and tell a business that they have to do that.
I was actually going to say that one of the benefits of the Paycheck Fairness Act is they actually do, as an extent of its passed, prohibit that secrecy, and they also would be collecting the data so people would actually know what they should be asking for those levels specifically. So.
I mean, I can imagine, though, in the workforce, it's going to be difficult when you start to see people fighting over what one person is making over the other. I'm not making an excuse here, but I'm just putting out a possible scenario.
So so how do you address that?
Well, you know, we've started seeing tech companies in Silicon Valley starting to move towards more transparency in the number of people of color that they're hiring, as well as the number of women. And I'd love to see that move into the private sector as well. And maybe the more we demand of it as individuals, we'll start to see that. Again, though, I'm not sure if Uncle Sam is the right person to be advocating or forcing.
But you know, the federal government, I was going to say, the federal government already does what we were just talking about. Right. If you go to, I was going to say, if you go to Legistock is what I like to call it.
Yes.
You can see how much every single person is making. And of course, when it's the government, we think that we should know how much everybody's making because it's our tax dollars paying for it. Mm-hmm. But you can also get a better sense of who in your office is making what, and the men versus the women. And you can arm yourself with the facts then to be able to go into your boss's office and say, you know, I know that this person's making this. And make a case for yourself. Here's all the work that I do, bullet point by bullet point, and ask more for yourself, because I know this is probably something you can speak more to. You're all about the studies. There are plenty of studies out there that show that part of what women's problem is the initiative, that they feel afraid to go in and talk to their bosses and advocate on behalf of more pay for themselves.
But let me turn the conversation a little bit. First of all, is it sexist that there's all this pressure out there on women, like the whole Sheryl Sandberg thing of lean in? It's you should lean in, you should ask for more money, and that's your problem. Versus, is there bias in the system that no matter if you lean in too far, you're going to crash and fall?
So I do think that at the end of the day, there is discrimination, and we need to call it out where it is.
And talk about
totally
the
agree with
IWF report, please.
Absolutely. Working for Women Agenda, this is we want to change the conversation around what it means to, as I mentioned before, really ensure that women are able to get hired, and then also that they're able to keep their money. So from a savings perspective, from a way to make sure that their household needs are being taken care of right now as well as in the future. But then what are some of the regulatory issues that are keeping us from being hired, whether it's the entry level or it's at the top level of business. But when it comes to
tell me a little bit about, tick off a couple of those legislations.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, do you think Family and Medical Leave Act is something that would harm women in the workplace?
Well, we want to make sure there's flexibility for women in the workplace. And some of these mandates, while they may help some women, they have the unintentional consequence of harming some women. I mean, we are all in different life stages here, and we have different needs in the workforce. A young woman who's just getting into business or into a job, she may not be looking to have a baby right away. So she may not be looking for paid time off. Whereas a woman who is, about to start a family, that's what she's thinking about. So we talk about making sure that you can, from a regulatory standpoint, repealing some of the regulations like Obamacare, or even just
how does Obamacare hurt women?
Well,
in the workplace,
it's the cumulative effect of lots of different regulations that make it expensive to hire someone. So while Obamacare is not specifically necessarily listed there, we also talk about the minimum wage, for example. We talk about some of the other costs that are added to a person who's hired. But then on the other side, there are other reforms that we talk about. I'll get into it a little bit more.
I mean, I was going to say, I actually think one of the most useful reforms that you mentioned would be the compensatory sort of paid time off. So there is a sense of, instead of being paid overtime for a job that has overtime pay, you would actually be allowed the choice to take that as time off. And I think that's a fantastic thing. I'm also somebody who believes that we don't necessarily have to or should continue to adhere to the 5-day-a-week, 40-hour work week. I mean, many people are working many more hours and would prefer to have a full day off if they actually put in those other hours on other days.
But what about minimum wage, which, like it or not, minimum wage is really more a woman's issue. When you talk about income inequality in this country, it's a women's issue.
Yes.
It's all about, 2/3 of the people earning the minimum wage are women.
Right.
So what, your take on what should be done?
Well, I mean, looking at the Working Women's Report, like my issue about it was great to see it sort of acknowledging that pay discrimination is definitely a thing that,
you mean by conservatives?
By conservatives across the spectrum, that,
because
is an
20
issue.
years ago, women were just, conservative view was, we're just like men, there's no difference.
Well, 20 years ago, I was in elementary school.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting was, the PCA, I guess it's the Personal kind of Compensation Account, which basically is sort of the Family Medical Leave Act. The issue that I have with that is when you have 2/3 of women who are minimum wage earners, setting aside $5,000 a year, that's not an option. Like, my mom's an immigrant. She worked 2 jobs. My dad worked 3 jobs. Every dollar that came in was to take care of us, to plan for school, to do all of those things. So I think it's definitely feasible for some women in a certain socioeconomic status, but it's not one that's, feasible for some in a lower socioeconomic status. So.
Well, and
Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I think you make a really great point there. I mean, what happens to people who can't afford to be able to put so many dollars aside every month? Well, what if they were able to raise their wages? Maybe their boss is able to give them more money, hire them at a higher pay level if they didn't have the restrictions on them from overtime pay or from higher minimum wages or from some of the other regulations that are already imposed. I think generally what we're talking about is making sure it's cheaper or it's not so expensive to hire a woman or to hire a worker, but then also what are some of the innovative ways that we can ensure that you can save for childcare, you can save for college, you can save for whatever is going to come up on the horizon. I feel I'm an immigrant as well, and I know what it's like when my mom, I don't know how she raised us, the two of us, on almost minimum wage, but she did it, and I think if she had some of these other vehicles, she had some lending circles, she could have put a couple of dollars aside for that.
Right.
Your thoughts on the studies, briefly.
I mean, I just think that what we're really talking about is it is a complex issue, and the discrimination and the social construction toward women who bargain is real and does exist, and I think that's the other piece that no government can fix.
All right, that's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. All right, I'm going to...